The night my stepmother slapped me for saying thank you too quietly, the crystal chandelier kept swinging like a clock counting down their lies. My father said, "We'll talk later." And later never came. Not until a court microphone forced him to answer. By then, I had already found the clause in my grandfather's will that turned every accusation they made into evidence against them. My name is Leah Richardson. I am 34 years old, and I coordinate operations for the Northlight Response Group. My job is to walk into chaos, fires, floods, collapsed structures, and build a system to pull people out. I manage logistics, chart evacuations, and sleep on cots in gymnasium command posts. I am good at it because I do not panic. Tonight, however, I was not in a disaster zone. I was at my father's wedding anniversary party in Riverton, Northland County, and the air was thicker with fakery than any smoke I had ever inhaled. The ballroom at the Riverton Grand was overdressed in silks and ice sculptures, all reflecting the light of a massive crystal chandelier that hung over the dance floor. My stepmother, Helena Marrow, was holding court. This entire event was less an anniversary and more a coronation. She had raised her champagne flute, and a tight crescent of photographers and major donors immediately formed around her, their cameras flashing, their checkbooks metaphorically open. Helena was beautiful in the way a freshly sharpened knife is beautiful, all polished surfaces and a dangerous edge. She smiled, a perfect, wide, toothy smile that never, ever reached her eyes. "To family," she toasted, her voice ringing with a practiced sincerity that made my stomach clench. "And to legacy." The applause was loud. My father, Graham Richardson, stood beside her, looking flushed and proud. He was a man who had always mistaken volume for conviction. Part of the evening's performance was the announcement of the Elias Richardson Scholarship Fund, named for my grandfather. It was my turn to speak. I walked to the lectern, the warmth of the spotlights feeling like an interrogation lamp. I kept it brief. I spoke of my grandfather's belief in community service, in practical skills. Then, as required, I thanked the event's primary patrons, Helena and my father. "Thank you," I said. My voice was low, clear, and professional. It's the voice I use on a radio when lives are on the line. It is not a voice for performance. I finished my remarks and stepped down. As I passed her table, Helena gripped my arm. Her fingers were thin but strong, her nails digging into my forearm. "That was," she whispered, the smile still plastered on her face for the benefit of a nearby county commissioner. "Pathetic." I tried to pull away. "Helena, not now." "No, now," she hissed, her face close to mine, the smell of her expensive perfume suffocating. "You go back to that microphone and you thank us properly. Speak up. People need to hear your gratitude." "I said thank you," I said, my voice still quiet. "Not loud enough." She stood abruptly, still holding my arm, and dragged me from the ballroom through a velvet curtain into a service corridor. The noise of the party instantly muted, replaced by the hum of an ice machine and the distant clatter of plates. The light here was a flat, unforgiving fluorescent. Her smile was gone. In its place was a cold fury I knew well. "You think you are better than this, don't you?" she said. It was not a question. "You fly in here with your muddy boots and your savior complex, looking down on us." "I am just here for Dad," I said, pulling my arm free. "That's all?" "You are here because you are obligated," she snapped. "And you will show respect. You will learn what gratitude sounds like." I turned to go back to the party. "I'm done. Helena." I never saw the hand move. I only felt the impact. The sound was sharp, a dry, cracking sound that seemed to echo off the tiled walls. My head snapped to the side, and my ear erupted in a high-pitched ring. For a second, the world went white with shock. It was not a child's punishment. It was the deliberate, full-force strike of one adult against another. I brought my hand to my cheek, my fingers trembling slightly. It was already hot, the skin stinging violently. A security guard at the end of the hall, near the kitchen doors, had turned his back the moment Helena raised her voice. He was now intently studying a fire extinguisher chart on the wall. He had heard it. He did nothing. The curtain rustled again. My father. He stood in the doorway, his silhouette backlit by the party's golden light. He looked at me, his eyes taking in my hand on my face, the fury in Helena's posture. He saw it. He knew. His eyes flickered past me, back towards the ballroom, towards the donors and the cameras. He straightened his tuxedo jacket. "Leah," he said, his voice tight. "We'll talk later." Helena, her composure instantly restored, brushed a non-existent piece of lint from his shoulder. "Go back to our guests. Graham, I'm just having a word with your daughter." He nodded, gave me one last, strained look, and disappeared back into the noise. I stayed frozen for a moment. Later, the word hung in the air. The most familiar lie he had ever told me. I looked at Helena. I did not raise my voice. I did not cry. I channeled every ounce of field training I had. I took a deep, steadying breath, the kind I take before entering a flooded basement. I folded the pain and the humiliation and the rage, and I packed them down into a small, hard, functional box deep inside my chest. I walked past her, down the corridor to the public restrooms, inside the ridiculously opulent marble bathroom. I locked myself in a stall. I pulled out my phone. I turned on the camera, switched it to the front-facing lens, and held it up. The fluorescent light was harsh. A bright, angry red handprint was already blooming on my left cheek, the skin slightly swollen. I took 3 pictures, the clinical click of the shutter the only sound. I saved them. I took another deep breath, flushed the toilet for show, and walked out. I re-entered the party from a different door, staying in the shadows at the edge of the room, near the bar. The music was loud. People were laughing. My father and Helena were on the dance floor, him spinning her head thrown back in a perfect pantomime of joy. And then I heard it, a snippet of conversation from 2 women near me, both holding plates of untouched appetizers. "Helena is finally making her move on Monday," one said, sipping her champagne. "Which move?" "She's always making a move. The family asset consolidation. She's filing to have Graham take over the old Richardson farm. Apparently, the daughter abandoned it years ago." "Really? I heard she was ungrateful." "That's what Helena said. Total waste of good land. They're trying to get it rezoned." The words hit me harder than the slap. The asset, Maple Row Farm. 60 acres of rolling hills and black soil that my grandfather, Elias, had loved more than anything. Land he had put into a trust. Land he had named me, specifically, as custodian for the narrative. Helena had been planting this story for years, watering it in the fertile soil of Riverton gossip. I was the one who left. I was the one who didn't care. She was the one saving the family legacy from my neglect. She was rewriting history, painting me as a villain to justify a theft. I turned and walked out of the ballroom. I didn't stop for my coat. As I crossed the grand lobby, I glanced up at the chandelier. It was still swaying, a slow, heavy pendulum. The countdown had begun. As I pushed through the heavy glass doors, a hand touched my sleeve. It was a young woman in a server's uniform. She looked terrified, but resolute. She pressed a folded cocktail napkin into my hand. "I was in the service hall," she whispered, not making eye contact. I heard it. My recorder was on. It's for internal training, to dispute bad tips." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. "That wasn't right. If you need a witness, call." She was gone before I could even thank her. I looked down at the napkin, a name, Mara Kincaid, and a phone number. I pushed out into the cold Northland County night. The air was sharp and clean, a stark contrast to the perfume and lies inside. I walked to my truck, the only practical vehicle in a sea of luxury sedans. I got in and sat in the dark for a long time. My cheek throbbed. I opened my wallet. Tucked behind my driver's license were my state commendations, hard-earned metal pins for life-saving actions during the Cedar Creek floods and the Highway 5 wildfire. They weren't flashy. They represented real work, real stakes. Helena had just made a critical mistake. She thought this was a family drama. She thought she was fighting an ungrateful daughter. She had no idea she had just declared war on an operations coordinator, and I was very, very good at managing a disaster. I drove away from the Riverton Grand, the throb in my cheek a dull metronome against the cold glass of the window. I left the circle of valets and gleaming cars behind, heading toward the county highway, the crystal chandelier, the polite laughter, the smell of expensive perfume. It all evaporated as the town lights fell away. My world is not chandeliers and champagne. My world is topographical maps under the harsh glow of portable LEDs. My world smells like wet canvas, diesel fumes, antiseptic solution, and smoke. At the Northlight Response Group, I do not coordinate parties. I coordinate rescues. I route supply flights into areas where the runways are compromised. I map evacuation corridors, calculating the burn rate of a wildfire against the average speed of a civilian vehicle. I draw lines on maps that separate the living from the dead, and I do it with a steady hand. My job is to walk into chaos and build a system, fast. My grandfather, Elias, would have understood that. He taught me the land at Maple Row Farm, the 60 acres Helena now referred to as a family asset. He taught me that the farm was not just property, it was a living system, a responsibility. He would take my hand when I was small, press it into the black soil after a rain, and ask, "You feel that, Leah? That's the engine. It doesn't care about your feelings, but it responds to your work." He taught me how to read the sky for weather and the trees for water. His hands were rough, calloused, the nails permanently lined with the earth. He was a man of few, clear words. Years ago, he carved a phrase into the underside of the wide porch railing at the farmhouse, low down, where only someone sitting on the top step, huddled against the post, would find it. I had traced the letters with my finger so many times I knew their depth by heart. Strong but not cruel. It was his motto, and it became mine. When Elias died, the clarity went with him. The funeral was gray and damp. My father, Graham, seemed adrift, lost without his anchor. He had always been the softer of the two, the one who liked the town, the parties, the sound of applause. He was lost. And then, 6 months later, Helena appeared. She was perfect, all sharp angles and expensive tailoring, with a posture that looked like it had been professionally installed. She arrived at the farm and immediately began updating. She painted over the worn, dark wood. She replaced the comfortable, sagging furniture with staged, uncomfortable pieces that looked like they belonged in a magazine, not a home. She brought in delicate, hothouse orchids, flowers that required constant, specialized care to replace the hardy, stubborn geraniums Elias had loved. Her praise was as empty as her decorating. "What a clever girl," she would say to me, about accomplishments that clearly bored her. "How rugged." She smiled with her teeth, never her eyes. She sanitized everything she touched, including my father. I left for college and then for Northlight, but I never left the farm, not really. Elias had made me custodian in his trust. "You understand the engine, Leah," he had said, his voice thin but his grip firm, signing the papers. "Don't let them turn it into a picture." So, I paid the taxes, every quarter, from my laptop, wherever I was, a forward operating base in Florida after a hurricane, a budget motel in Oregon during fire season, a cot in a gymnasium in Louisiana. It did not matter. The Northland County assessor received their electronic payment, $2,200, 4 times a year. It was a silent promise. It was not for my father. It was not to earn his approval or Helena's. It was a private, anonymous action. It was the rent I paid for the values he had instilled in me, the work I did to keep the engine running, even from afar. I tried to stay connected to my father. At first, the calls were normal. "Hi, Dad. Just checking in. I'm in Montana." He would sound distracted, distant. Then, Helena started answering his phone. Graham is terribly busy. Leah, what is this regarding? Her voice was always polite, a smooth, hard surface. It's not regarding anything, Helena. I'm just calling my dad. He'll have to call you back. His schedule is managed now. We are very focused on the new foundry initiatives. The calls back rarely came. My father's calendar, once open and easy, became a fortress. Helena was the gatekeeper. She controlled all access, all information. I was not on the approved list. My visits home became shorter, more strained. I was relegated to holidays, and even then, I felt like a guest, one who was not particularly welcome, one who kept tracking mud onto Helena's pristine white rugs. My letters started coming back, birthday cards for my father, photographs from the field. They would reappear in my mailbox weeks later, stamped in harsh red ink. Forwarding time expired. She had changed the locks on the mailbox. Metaphorically and, I suspected, literally, she was methodically, efficiently, erasing me. The world outside Riverton, however, saw me, last year, after the Cedar Creek flood, when my team rebuilt a comms line in 36 hours. A brown manila envelope arrived at my small apartment. Inside was a state commendation, a small and heavy pin for life-saving action. I did not have a place for it, so I put it in the worn wooden box on my dresser. It sat right next to the brass compass Elias had given me when I was 12. "So you always know where home is," he had said, the commendation and the compass. They sat side by side, the only two things that felt entirely real. Proof of my work and my origin. I learned to put my love into action, not apologies. I stopped trying to break through Helena's firewall. I focused on my work, on the farm's taxes, on the quiet promise to my grandfather. I parked my truck in the dark driveway of my rented condo. Miles from the party, I switched off the engine. The silence was absolute. My cheeks still stung. A dull, localized fire, but the physical pain was fading, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. The slap was not the point. The slap was just Helena losing control. A sloppy, unprofessional mistake. The real violence was the story she had been telling for years. The narrative I had heard tonight. The daughter who abandoned it. Ungrateful, the one who flew in with her muddy boots. She had been systematically poisoning the well, painting me as the negligent one, the one who walked away, all to justify a theft, all to get her perfectly manicured hands on those 60 acres. And my father, his words echoed, louder than the slap. "We'll talk later." It was the theme of my entire adult life. "Let's not make a scene, Leah. Helena is just under a lot of stress, honey. It's just not a good time. We'll talk later," was his code for, "I am choosing not to deal with this." It was the sound of his abdication. Tonight, in that hallway, he had seen the truth. He had seen her fury in my face, and he had chosen the donors. He had chosen the performance. I sat in the dark truck. I thought about screaming. I thought about driving back there and confronting them both in the middle of the dance floor, showing everyone my face. But that is not how I work. That is drama. I deal in logistics. I turned on the dome light. I unfolded the cocktail napkin. Mara Kincaid. A phone number. A witness. A recording. This was not a family fight anymore. This was an incident, and an incident requires a report. I would not yell. I would not cry. I would not make a scene. That was their territory. They lived in the messy, loud world of emotional manipulation and public relations. I live in a world of logistics, data, and consequences. Helena wanted a drama. I would give her an audit. I went inside, my boots heavy on the stairs. I did not bother with an ice pack for my face. I went to my desk, opened my laptop, and started a new file. I named it Maple Row Evidence. I would not fight her. I would simply document her. I would gather every tax receipt. I would pull every bank statement I had. I would contact Mara Kincaid and secure that recording. And I would ensure the chain of custody was clean. I would find the original trust documents Elias had signed. I would build a case so solid, so grounded in fact, that her narrative would simply collapse under its own weight. I would not be strong and cruel. I would be strong, and I would be precise. The time for later was over. It arrived, as predicted, on Monday. The mail carrier, who usually just nodded, looked at the envelope and handed it to me with a strange, hesitant courtesy. It was thick, cream-colored, expensive. The return address was the Northland County Chancery Court. I did not open it in the hallway. I took it inside, placed it on my kitchen table, and made a pot of coffee. Black. I let the machine finish its cycle. I poured a cup, my hand steady. Only then did I sit down and use a knife to slit the envelope. The language was dense, legal, but the intent was as clear as a knife cut. A petition, filed by Helena Marrow on behalf of her husband, Graham Richardson. It sought to transfer the custodianship of the Maple Row Farm Trust. The grounds were prolonged neglect and sustained interruption of duties by the named custodian, me. Attached to the petition were the exhibits, Helena's proof. They were a series of invoices, all on glossy cardstock, from a company I had never heard of. Silverline Aesthetics and Design. I scanned the line items. Consultation on seasonal color palettes, projected analysis for ornamental shrubbery upgrades, landscape curation services. There was a bill for $2,000 for perimeter flow assessment, which seemed to be a flowery term for someone walking the fence line. It was all fiction. It was the language of brochures, not farming. These invoices did not match the land. They matched Helena's cocktail party narrative. I finished my coffee. I felt no panic, just the low, cold hum of an engine starting. This was no longer a family problem. This was a logistical challenge. I went to the closet in my small spare room, on the floor. Beneath a stack of emergency blankets was a black, fireproof safe box. I spun the combination lock. Inside was my entire life, the one that ran silent and deep beneath the surface. I pulled out the folders. First, the tax receipts. 12 years of them, one for every single quarterly property tax payment I had made. Each one a quiet digital proof of presence, of responsibility. Second, the bank statements, with the corresponding electronic transfers highlighted, payments to the Northland County Assessor, payments for the satellite internet I kept active at the farmhouse, payments for the insurance. Third, a single, black hard drive. I took it back to the table and plugged it into my laptop, the screen filled with folders, organized by season. For the past 4 years, I had been paying a local drone operator, a quiet kid just starting his business, to do flyovers of the farm. I told him I'd just like to see it, to make sure things were okay from a distance. The truth was, I was creating a visual baseline. I clicked on Spring, 2 years ago. The high-definition footage was smooth. It showed the northern fence line, the one bordering the state lands. It showed the new posts I had put in, replacing the ones that had rotted. The drone zoomed in on the fresh, pressure-treated wood, a stark contrast to the gray, weathered rails. I clicked, Summer, last year. The drone followed the main irrigation ditch Elias had dug. I had flown home for a vacation, spent 4 days in hip waders with a shovel, clearing a decade's worth of silt and beaver dams. The footage showed the water running clear and fast. I clicked Winter this year. The drone hovered over the main barn. It showed the new tin sheets on the western side of the roof, the ones I'd hired a local crew, not Silverline Aesthetics, to install after a windstorm, paying them in cash. Helena had submitted invoices for design. I had receipts for lumber, gravel, and metal roofing. I took a yellow legal pad and drew a line down the middle. On the left, I wrote Helena's claims. On the right, Leah's facts. I laid out the timeline of the invoices against the timeline of my drone footage and bank transfers. Her perimeter flow assessment was dated the same week my bank statement showed a payment to Riverton Farm and Feed for 200 pounds of agricultural lime. My kitchen table was no longer a place to eat. It was an operations center, a battle map. I identified my assets: paper, digital records, facts. I identified my liabilities: my father's weakness, his testimony, and I identified my primary contingency. I picked up my phone and dialed the number from the cocktail napkin. She answered on the third ring. "Hello?" Her voice was cautious. "Mara? This is Leah Richardson. From the party on Saturday." There was a sharp intake of breath. "Oh, hi. I wasn't sure you would call." "You were kind to reach out. You mentioned a recording." "Yes," she said, her voice dropping lower. "I checked it as soon as I got home. My recorder. It's for internal use. We're supposed to document our hours, dispute tips, that kind of thing. It just runs. I was in the service corridor logging an order. It got everything. The yelling. Her voice." Mara paused. "And the sound. It's very clear. Mara, are you willing to sign an affidavit stating that the recording is authentic and unaltered, and provide me with a copy?" Silence. I could hear her thinking, weighing the risk. "She's a powerful woman in this town," Mara said quietly. "I know." "Good," Mara said, her voice firming up. "Because I'm tired of people like her. Yes, I'll do it. When and where?" We met an hour later at a public notary office downtown. Mara was young, younger than I'd realized, but her eyes were steady. She had the audio file on a thumb drive. We transferred it to a new, sterile drive I had bought on the way. The notary, a no-nonsense woman with gray hair, watched the entire transaction. Mara signed the affidavit, stating the make and model of the recorder, the context of the recording, and the fact that the file was a true and accurate copy. I countersigned as receiving it. The notary affixed her seal. Chain of custody. Secure. I went back to my condo and called the law firm that had handled my grandfather's estate. The original lawyer, Mr. Abernathy, was long retired, living in Florida, but his partner, a younger man named Jessup, was still there. "Leah Richardson," he said, recognition in his voice. "Of course, I remember your grandfather well. How can I help?" "I need a complete, certified copy of my grandfather's will and the full trust agreement for Maple Row Farm. There's a custodianship dispute." Jessup was silent for a beat. "I see. I always wondered if this day would come. Elias was very specific. I'll have the packet messengered to you this afternoon." "Mr. Jessup," I said, pausing. "I have a strange memory. My grandfather. He used to talk about a test, a custodianship test. Does that mean anything to you?" I heard the smile in his voice. "Elias was a smart man. Ms. Richardson, a very smart man. He believed the land chose its own keeper. I think you'll find the trust documents very illuminating. Read them carefully, especially the addendums." The packet arrived at 4 p.m. I spread the thick, legal-sized documents on my table, next to the drone footage stills, and then I drove to the farm. I hadn't been back since the party. I parked my truck by the barn, avoiding the main house. Helena's touch was everywhere. An ornamental gravel path, utterly impractical for mud or snow, snaked to the front door. The sturdy geranium boxes Elias had built were gone, replaced with tall, skinny planters holding dead. Windswept twigs. I went to the front porch. I sat on the top step, just as I had as a child, and reached my hand under the railing. My fingers found the groove of the letters he had carved. Strong but not cruel. He was a practical man. He was a carpenter. He built this house with his own hands. Where would he put something? He wouldn't bury it. He would build it. I went inside. The house was cold, sterile, smelling faintly of Helena's chemical potpourri. I went to the main staircase. It was solid oak, built by my grandfather. I pressed on each riser, the first, the second, the third. On the fourth, there was a tiny, almost imperceptible give. I went to the mudroom. His old tools were still there, hanging in the closet he had forbidden Helena to organize. I grabbed a pry bar and a mallet. I wedged the bar into the hairline seam. It took 10 minutes of careful, patient work. I was not going to break what he had built. Finally, with a soft crack of old varnish, the riser came loose. Behind it was a small, hollow space. and in that space was an oilcloth packet, tied with twine. My hands were shaking as I opened it. It was a handwritten document, several pages long, on old legal paper. The handwriting was my grandfather's, strong and angled. At the bottom of each page was his signature, and the initials of Mr. Abernathy. It was an addendum to the trust. I read it, standing there in the cold, silent house. It was a test, a custodianship test. The clause was ironclad. Custodianship could not be determined by petition or by proxy. It could only be held by a party who could prove, with documentation, direct, physical, and sustained labor on the farm. He had defined labor in explicit detail: mending of fence, clearing of ditches, planting of crops, harvesting of same, repair of structures, and tending of livestock. He had also defined what was not labor: managerial oversight, aesthetic consultation, third-party contracting for cosmetic purposes, or any action not involving the direct application of effort by the custodian. And then, the final line: the right of custodianship was contingent on proving a minimum of 1,000 hours of this direct labor within the previous 5-year period. Proof was to be submitted in the form of written logs, corroborated by at least one local, non-family witness. Helena's invoices for ornamental shrubbery were not just irrelevant, they were proof that she had failed the test. I drove back to my condo. The oilcloth packet on the seat beside me. I had my logs, my vacation days, my flight receipts, my scribbled notes of mended north fence or cleared main ditch, and I had my witnesses, the neighbors, Etta and Cole Varner, who had watched me work, who had lent me their post-hole digger. I went to my closet. I pushed aside my jeans and my work shirts. I pulled out the one formal garment I owned. It was not a suit. It was my Northlight Response Group ceremonial blazer. It was dark blue, sharply tailored, and functional. On the left breast, pinned through the thick wool, were my state commendation ribbons, the one for the Cedar Creek floods, the one for the Highway 5 fire. They were not pretty. They were not aesthetic. They were earned. This would be my uniform. I stacked my evidence on the table: the tax receipts, the bank statements, the drone photos, the audio file, and now, the handwritten addendum. I would not hire a lawyer. A lawyer would speak for me. I had the receipts. I had the pictures. I had the recording. I had my grandfather's own words. I would speak for myself. The truth did not need an interpreter. The Northland County Chancery Court was not grand. It was functional, beige, and smelled faintly of old coffee and floor wax. The fluorescent lights hummed a low, constant B-flat. This was not a room for high drama. It was a room for bureaucratic decisions, which made it, in its own way, more terrifying. Judge Harold L. Sims presided. He looked exactly as the court filing suggested: a man with tired eyes who had seen decades of human conflict reduced to paperwork. He was precise, methodical, and visibly impatient with performance. Helena was performing. She was dressed in a suit of pale, cream-colored silk, her hair pulled back in a way that managed to look both professional and tragically soft. She was the picture of the wronged matriarch, forced into this unpleasantness. Beside her, my father, Graham, looked diminished. His expensive vest was tight across his chest, and his face was flushed. He did not look at me. He stared intently at the polished wood of the table in front of him. Their lawyer, Barton Hale, was the opposite. He was all confidence and polished leather, smiling at the court clerk, adjusting his cuffs, exuding an expensive, easy charm. "Mr. Hale, you may begin," Judge Sims said, his voice flat. Hale rose, gliding to the lectern. He began by painting the picture Helena had spent years crafting. It was a story of heroic preservation. "Your Honor," Hale began, his voice smooth and reasonable, "we are here today to petition for the preservation of a Northland County legacy, Maple Row Farm, a property of significant local history, left in trust by the late Elias Richardson." He gestured toward me, a look of profound reluctance on his face. That trust, however, named his granddaughter, Leah Richardson, as custodian, a granddaughter who, admirable as her own career in disaster relief may be, effectively abandoned her post. She left Northland County. She left this farm. He paused, letting the word abandoned hang in the quiet room. For years, he continued, Maple Row fell into neglect, fences rotted, the grounds became overgrown, the very structures were at risk. He then turned to Helena. Thankfully, Mrs. Helena Marrow Richardson, who loves this family and its legacy, stepped in. She could not stand by and watch her husband's heritage crumble. She took action. This was the cue for his exhibits. They were beautiful, glossy, and organized in a thick, leather-bound binder. He placed 8x10 photographs on an easel, pictures of new flower beds by the mailbox, an ornamental gravel path, a newly painted, decorative well pump. These, Hale said, holding up the stack of glossy invoices from Silverline Aesthetics, are the actions of a dutiful family member. We have receipts totaling over $40,000 for essential maintenance, landscape curation, and structural assessments, all managed, overseen, and often paid for by Mrs. Marrow Richardson, who stepped in to save this legacy when the named custodian would not. We are simply asking the court to legally recognize the reality of the situation, that Graham Richardson, guided by his wife, is the true custodian, and to transfer the title to prevent further neglect. Hale sat down. The narrative was clean, simple, and powerful. Judge Sims looked at me. Ms. Richardson, you are representing yourself? I am, Your Honor. Mr. Hale presents a compelling narrative of abandonment and neglect. How do you respond? I stood. I walked to the lectern. My dark blue Northlight blazer felt steadying, a piece of my real world in this theater. The small, colored ribbons on my chest were stark against the wool. I respond not with a narrative, Your Honor, but with a ledger, I said. Mr. Hale's story is missing all the data. I did not present a binder. I placed simple, manila folders, clearly labeled, on the lectern. First, I submit Exhibit A. I place the first folder down. 12 years of quarterly property tax payments for the Maple Row farm parcel, drawn from my personal account in $4,000 annual installments. I place the second folder down. Exhibit B, bank statements and corresponding receipts for the farm's insurance policy, utilities, and satellite service, all paid by me, without interruption. I place the third folder down. Exhibit C, high resolution, time-stamped drone photography, taken quarterly for the last 4 years. These images clearly show the structural integrity of the barn roof, which Mr. Hale implies is rotting. It is not. The western pitch was replaced by me 2 winters ago. I held up a specific photo. This footage from last July shows the main irrigation ditch, cleared by me, by hand, during my vacation. This contradicts the overgrown assessment. I looked at Hale's glossy photos of flowers. Helena's petition claims maintenance, but her invoices are for aesthetics. My evidence shows stewardship. There is a difference. Barton Hale looked momentarily confused, as if a janitor had interrupted his board meeting. Your Honor, I said, that difference is the entire point of the trust. Which brings me to Exhibit D. I placed the oilcloth packet on the lectern. This is a handwritten addendum to the Elias Richardson Trust, notarized by his legal counsel, which I recovered from a purpose-built enclosure within the farmhouse. A murmur went through the room. Hale stood up. Objection. This document is of questionable provenance. We have the official trust. It is signed by the testator and notarized by your own firm's founding partner. Mr. Hale, I said. It is not questionable. It is definitive. The judge waved Hale to silence. Let me see it. The bailiff delivered the document. Judge Sims put on his reading glasses. He read the first page, then he read it again. He looked up, and for the first time, his tired eyes seemed to settle, to focus. He looked over his glasses at Barton Hale. Mr. Hale, this addendum defines custodianship as, and I quote, direct, physical, and sustained labor. It goes on to specify mending of fence, clearing of ditches, and repair of structures. It then explicitly excludes managerial oversight, aesthetic consultation, or third-party contracting for cosmetic purposes. This document, if authentic, makes your entire argument and your binder of invoices completely irrelevant. Helena's perfect posture faltered. Just for a second, Hale scrambled. Your Honor, labor can be interpreted in a modern context. Project management is labor. Mrs. Marrow Richardson. The judge cut him off. Turning to Helena, Mrs. Marrow Richardson, your invoices from Silverline Aesthetics total over $40,000. This addendum requires the custodian to perform direct physical labor. Can you itemize the hours you personally spent mending fences or clearing ditches? Helena smiled, a small, patient smile, as if explaining something complex to a child. Your Honor, I manage the asset. My labor is project management. It is oversight. That is the labor. At this level of... So, no, the judge said flatly. You did not perform the labor described. I performed the labor of a modern executive, Helena said, her voice hardening. The judge looked at me. Ms. Richardson? This was the moment. The air was tight. Your Honor, I said, my voice quiet. The petitioner's entire case rests on her character and her motive. She claims she acted out of a loving duty to save a family legacy. I claim she acted to seize an asset. That is a strong accusation. Ms. Richardson, the judge said, his eyes narrowing. I have a 20-second audio file I would like to play. It was recorded by a third party 2 nights before the petition was filed. It speaks directly to the petitioner's credibility and her true motive regarding her family duty and her feelings toward me, the current custodian. Hale was on his feet, his face red. Objection. This is an ambush. Your Honor, this is prejudicial. It's irrelevant. This is a property dispute, not a family therapy session. We have no idea if this is authentic. It is accompanied by a sworn affidavit from the individual who recorded it. Your Honor, I said, my voice rising to meet his. It is relevant because it goes directly to the petitioner's motive. She is asking you to believe her story. This audio demonstrates her character. The judge held up a hand. Silence. Both of you. He stared at me. I will allow it. I am reserving judgment on its admissibility, but I will hear it, for the purpose of assessing credibility regarding motive. 20 seconds. Ms. Richardson. The clerk provided a small digital speaker, which I plugged into my phone. The silence in the room was absolute, heavy. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights. I pressed play. First, the sterile background noise of the service corridor. Then, Helena's voice. It was not the smooth, tragic voice she used in court. It was low, cold, and full of acid. If you're going to slap her, the voice spat, make sure she learns gratitude. A second of silence, and then, the sound, the sharp, wet, cracking sound of her open palm connecting with my face. It was not loud, but it was physical. It felt like it landed in the room itself. A woman in the back row gasped. I saw the court reporter flinch, her hands frozen over the keys. Helena went the color of old chalk. Her mask of cultivated sorrow did not just crack, it vaporized. Barton Hale was shouting, "Prejudicial! Your Honor, this is character assassination. It has no bearing on the price of lumber." The judge slammed his gavel. "Order, order, Mr. Hale." He waited for the noise to die. He looked at Hale, his eyes cold. "Mr. Hale, your client is petitioning this court to strip the respondent of her rights based on the respondent's supposed moral failings and lack of character. This audio speaks directly to the petitioner's character and her motive in that interaction. The objection is overruled. The recording is entered as Exhibit E." I looked at my father. He was staring at the polished table as if it were a life raft. He was not looking at me. He was not looking at Helena. His jaw muscle was clenching, a rapid, frantic rhythm. "We'll talk later. We'll talk later." It was the only thing his body knew how to say. Judge Sims sighed. A long, weary sound. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. He looked at Helena's silk suit and my wool blazer. He looked at her glossy invoices and my stacked, dull folders. "We are adjourned for the day," he announced. "I need to review the specific Northland County case law regarding holographic addendums and labor-specific requirements in custodial trusts." He stood, gathering his robes. "This court will reconvene tomorrow at 10 a.m. He paused at the door, looking at us all. "Custodianship," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet room, "is a duty, not a title." The hallway erupted. It was a storm of whispers and phone screens. Helena, however, was a professional. She was already repairing the narrative. As she and my father were swept out, a local society blogger, one Helena had fed stories to for years, rushed up, her phone recording. Helena, what was that in there?" Helena stopped. She smiled. A beautiful, tragic smile, and her eyes instantly brimmed with tears. She dabbed her eye with a silk tissue. "This is just a deeply unfortunate family disagreement," she whispered, her voice breaking perfectly. "It's heartbreaking. My daughter is clearly very troubled, and she is putting her father through an agony. We just want what's best for the family legacy. We are praying for her." She was magnificent. She was selling the story, even now, painting me as the unstable, aggressive one. The blogger turned to me, sensing the conflict. "Leah, what's your response to Helena's claim that you're troubled?" I ignored them. I ignored the cameras and the whispers. That was their battlefield. It was all noise. I walked past them to the clerk's office, where my folders were being processed. I pulled out my phone as the clerk applied the official, dated, filed stamp to my evidence log. I took a clear, close-up photograph of that stamp, the time, the date, the case number. The paper trail was the only path out of the disaster. The stamp was real. The rest was just weather. I put my phone in my pocket and walked out of the courthouse into the clean, cold air. Judge Sims was on the bench at 10 a.m., sharp. The atmosphere in the courtroom had shifted. The novelty seekers and society bloggers were still there, but they were joined by serious-looking people in suits and the local press. The audio of the slap had turned a dry property dispute into a news story. "Good morning," Judge Sims said, his voice flat, ignoring the press. "This court has reviewed the holographic addendum, Exhibit D, after consulting with the relevant probate statutes. This court finds the addendum to be authentic and binding. The requirements set forth by the testator, Elias Richardson, are the law of this trust." Barton Hale was on his feet instantly. "Your Honor, we maintain that the term labor is subjective and that—" "It is not subjective, Mr. Hale," the judge cut him off, his voice sharp. The testator was extraordinarily specific. He defined it: mending of fence, clearing of ditches, repair of structures. He excluded aesthetic consultation and managerial oversight. Your client's invoices are, therefore, inadmissible as proof of labor. Helena's mask was back in place, but it was brittle. My father looked gray. "The petition to remove the custodian now rests on a single point," the judge continued. "The addendum requires the named custodian, Ms. Richardson, to prove a minimum of 1,000 hours of this defined labor within the preceding 5-year period. The burden is on you, Ms. Richardson, to provide that proof." This was the moment. The entire case. 1,000 hours. I stood and walked to the lectern. "Thank you, Your Honor. I have that proof." I did not place a single document down. I placed a thick, worn, leather-bound book on the lectern. It was my grandfather's original farm log. Its spine was cracked, the cover soft with age. "This is the Maple Row farm log," I said. "The first entry is dated March 10th, 1974, in my grandfather's hand. The last entry is dated 6 weeks ago, in mine. When I accepted the role of custodian, I accepted the responsibility of the log." I opened the book. The pages were thick, filled with my handwriting. which was tighter, more clinical than Elias's looping cursive, but the format was the same: date, job, weather, hours. "I submit this log as Exhibit F," I said, "and I have called 2 witnesses, who are present today, to corroborate it." I saw Hale scan the gallery, his eyes landing on the 2 people sitting in the front row, Etta and Cole Varner, our neighbors for 30 years. They were in their 60s, dressed in their Sunday best, their faces weathered and serious. They were the land. They were unimpeachable. "Your Honor," I said, reading from the page. "My log, entry for May 4th, 2 years ago. 4 days, total 29 hours, cleared main irrigation ditch, east parcel, silt buildup, removed 2 beaver dams, weather. Clear, high of 75, signed, Leah Richardson." I pointed to the bottom of the page, and a witness signature. "Cole Varner, saw the work, ditch is running clean." Cole nodded grimly from his seat. "Log entry, October 19th, last year. 3 days, total 21 hours. Replaced 47 feet of rotted fence rail, north boundary, posts 20 through 36. Signed, Leah Richardson. Witness signature, Etta Varner. Helped her string the wire." I turned the pages. "Vodding the hay barn roof, clearing the culvert by the road, resetting the gate at the south pasture, for 12 years, Your Honor, every vacation day, every long weekend. The total hours in the last 5 years alone are 1,420. The work was done." I then placed my stack of receipts on top of the log. "This is Exhibit G, the corresponding invoices, not for aesthetics, but for materials. This is an invoice from Riverton Supply, dated May 5th, 2 years ago, for 40 bags of agricultural lime and 3 bundles of burlap. This directly corresponds to the log entry for riverbank stabilization and matches the drone photography in Exhibit C." I had gone to Riverton Supply yesterday. Sal, the manager, had looked at my list. "Yeah, I remember you," he'd grunted, tapping at his ancient computer. "Elias's granddaughter. You're the one who buys actual supplies. That new wife of his just buys paint and bird baths." He had hit print, and a cascade of archived invoices, all bearing my name and my credit card number, had spooled out of the machine. Hale looked sick. He had no counter evidence. His entire case was based on my absence, and I had just provided a detailed, witnessed log of my presence. But I was not finished. Meeting the test was defense. Now I had to show intent. "Your Honor," I said, my voice hardening, "my evidence proves I met the labor requirement, but the court deserves to know why the petitioner filed this motion at all. She did not file it because I was negligent. She filed it to cover her own fraud." Hale erupted. "Fraud. Objection, Your Honor. This is slanderous. She is desperate and she is lashing out." "That is a very serious allegation, Ms. Richardson," Judge Sims warned, his eyes like steel. "You had better substantiate it, and quickly." "I can," I said. I held up the top invoice from Helena's glossy binder. The primary contractor, Silverline Aesthetics. The company paid over $40,000 for landscape curation. I ran a state corporate search. I placed the printout on the lectern. Silverline Aesthetics was registered as a new LLC 3 months ago. The registered agent is a woman named Amelia Vance, Your Honor. Amelia Vance is a known social acquaintance of Helena's. They are doubles partners at the Riverton Tennis Club. A new, sharper murmur went through the room. But the money trail is more damning. I submitted my final exhibit. This is a simple bank routing diagram, compiled from public records and discovery requests. On June 5th, $40,000 was transferred from my father's business account, Richardson Foundry, to Silverline Aesthetics. On June 9th, $38,000 was transferred from Silverline Aesthetics directly to Marrow and Mirror. I paused. Marrow and Mirror, Your Honor, is the event planning company owned solely by Helena Marrow Richardson. The silence in the room was absolute. Even Helena had stopped breathing. She did not hire a contractor, I stated. my voice cutting through the silence. She used the farm as a false pretense. She invoiced my father for $40,000 for work that was never done, and paid her friend a $2,000 fee to help her launder $38,000 of it back to herself. This wasn't stewardship, it was embezzlement. Using my grandfather's land as a ghost employee. I have filed a formal report of this activity with the court clerk, recommending referral to the district attorney. My father finally looked up. He looked at Helena. His face was not angry. It was the face of a man who had just seen the scaffolding of his life collapse. But why? I continued, speaking to the judge but answering the question in my father's eyes. Why go to all this trouble? Not just for $40,000. She wanted the land, and not to nurture it. She wanted to monetize it. I presented one final document. This, Your Honor, is an application from 2012, filed by my grandfather. It's for the Northland County Land Conservancy Trust. It was a state fund to protect active farmland from development. The application was approved, granting significant tax credits and subsidies, but it was contingent on the custodian filing annual labor logs. The pieces clicked into place. Helena found this. She wanted those subsidies, but she did not want to do the work. So, she tried to fake the work. First with her Silverline invoices. When that proved too complex, she pivoted to a new strategy. Have me declared negligent, seize the trust, and then, with full control, she could dissolve the trust, break the conservancy agreement, and sell the land to developers. Hale was pale. Speculation, Your Honor. She is building a fantasy. It is not speculation, I said. I pulled out my phone. I received a text message this morning from Mac Henshaw, my father's head mechanic at the foundry. I read it. Leah, Mac here. Felt you should know. Mrs. Marrow Richardson called me last month. She wanted to know if my bulldozer could clear scrub brush up at the farm, fast. Said something about making it market-ready. I told her that land was in the conservancy, and she'd need permits. She got real quiet. Said she'd handle the permits, and canceled the booking the next day. Good luck. I put the phone down. The picture was complete. The fake invoices, the shell company, the money laundering, the bulldozer. It was a coherent, linear plan to steal, exploit, and sell. Judge Sims stared at Helena for a long, cold moment. She was no longer a grieving matriarch. She was just a defendant. He adjusted his glasses. Mr. Hale, you have a recess of 1 hour to confer with your client. I suggest you use it. I gathered my logbook, my receipts, and my diagrams. As I walked out for the recess, a local reporter hurried to my side. Ms. Richardson, that was... Helena's team has been calling this a simple family matter. What do you call it? I stopped at the top of the courthouse steps, the cold autumn air hitting my face. I looked out at the town square, at the trees Elias had helped plant. The land taught me this, I said, my voice steady. You reap what you sweat for. The hour recess felt like a compression chamber. When we were called back in, the air in the courtroom was thin and sharp. The press gallery was full. Helena and my father had not returned from their conference with Barton Hale until the last possible second. Helena walked in first, her back rigid, her face a mask of serene, victimized marble. My father followed, a step behind. He looked like he had aged a decade. Barton Hale's expensive charm was gone, replaced by a gray functional exhaustion. He was a man fulfilling an obligation. He had no case left. He had only this. The petition calls Mr. Graham Richardson, Hale said, his voice flat. My father stood. He fumbled with the button on his suit jacket, then gave up. He walked to the witness stand. It was a long, terrible walk. Every eye was on him. This man who had been a pillar of the Riverton business community, the son of Elias, the husband of Helena. He looked, for the first time, like none of those things. He just looked small. He took the oath, his hand trembling slightly on the rail. I do. Hale approached, his notes clearly useless. Mr. Richardson, We are here regarding the petition to transfer custodianship of Maple Row Farm. Yes. You are the son of the testator, Elias Richardson. I am. And you support this petition? My father hesitated. He looked at Helena. Her eyes were on him, a bright, unblinking, reptilian focus. Yes, he said, the word cracking. Mr. Richardson, Hale continued, this court has heard testimony regarding an addendum to your father's trust. Were you aware of this handwritten document? My father shook his head, his eyes on his hands. No, not specifically. I let Helena handle the paperwork. She's meticulous. So, you were not aware of the specific labor requirements? The 1,000 hours? No, I trusted my wife's judgment. She was just trying to protect the farm from neglect. Thank you. No further questions, Hale said, practically running back to his seat. Judge Sims looked at me. Ms. Richardson, your witness. I stood. I did not move to the lectern. I remained where I was, my hands on my own table, on my own evidence. I was not going to approach him. I was going to make him answer from where he was. Graham Richardson, I said. My voice was low, but it carried in the dead silence. He flinched, but did not look up. You testified that you let Helena handle the paperwork. Did that include reading the original trust document your father left? I glanced at it. Years ago. It was complex. But you never read the addendum? No. You were not aware of the labor requirement? No. Were you aware, I asked, that the farm's property taxes, totaling over $8,000 a year, were due quarterly? His head came up. Just a fraction. I assumed Helena was handling it. Assumed? From what account? The household account, or the business? He trailed off. He knew. Were you aware that the farm's insurance policy, which protects the barns and the house, was due annually? Helena. She handled all of that. I let the silence sit. I walked, slowly, to the clerk's desk and picked up the thick, heavy stack of my tax receipts. 12 years of them. I held them. Mr. Richardson, I said, in 12 years, in all the time since I was named custodian, in all the time you believed I had abandoned the farm, I paused. The name Mr. Richardson felt like a lie. A protective suit. I let it fall away. Dad, the word landed in the courtroom like a physical blow. He squeezed his eyes shut. Dad, did you ever, in 12 years, ask me if I was still paying the farm taxes? He swallowed. A dry, painful click I could see from 20 feet away. The flush on his face was gone. He was just pale. No, he whispered. I placed the stack of receipts on the lectern, facing him. The thud of the paper was the only sound. Exhibit A. Your Honor, I said, my voice purely procedural again. 12 years of payments, the last one cleared 2 weeks ago, from my personal account, every single one. I returned to my table. My father's eyes were locked on that stack of paper. Judge Sims leaned forward, his voice losing its patient, tired edge. It was now sharp. Mr. Richardson, you are the testator's son. You live 10 miles from this farm. Your petition, the one you signed, claims the land was crumbling from neglect. Why, then, did you not, yourself, log a single hour of labor? Why did you not mend a single fence? My father looked at the judge, his expression one of profound, pathetic confusion. I was busy, he said, his voice pleading. I have the foundry. I have the town board. I was busy taking care of my family. I said it, so quietly I was not sure I had spoken aloud, but I had. By pretending not to hear? The entire room, the press, the clerk, the judge, everyone, drew a single, collective, silent breath. It was the sound of a vacuum being created. My father's head snapped toward me, his eyes wide. He finally saw me. And at that exact moment, Helena, from her seat, reached out and put her hand on his arm, a tight, possessive, warning grip, and for the first time in 15 years. My father reacted. He flinched. He pulled his arm away from her touch. A small, violent shrug, as if her hand were hot. Helena's mask broke. Her eyes widened, and her face filled with a pure, white rage. She had lost control of him, here, in front of everyone. Judge Sims stared at my father, his face hard. "Mr. Richardson, the addendum your father wrote, the one you did not read, protected his legacy from this exact situation. It protected the land from people who saw it as a title, not a job." He looked at Helena, then back at my father. "Custodianship cannot be delegated for convenience, and it cannot be seized for profit." He looked at me. "Your witness, Ms. Richardson, is excused." My father stood. He was trembling. He looked lost, a man standing in the wreckage of his own life. Having just realized he was the one holding the hammer, he stepped down from the witness stand, but instead of walking to his table, he stopped, frozen in the middle of the room. His eyes had found my bag, which was open on the table beside my chair. Inside, lying on top of my logbook, was my grandfather's brass compass. I had brought it for myself. A piece of him, a reminder of true north. My father saw it. His face, already pale, crumpled. He recognized it. It was the compass Elias had carried every single day, the one he had taught us both to use. He took a stumbling step toward my table. The bailiff shifted, unsure. "Leah," my father whispered, his voice a raw sound, heard only by the first 2 rows. Is that his compass?" He reached out a hand, not to take it, but as if to touch a ghost. Can I see it?" I looked at his hand. His manicured, soft hand, that had not held a tool in decades, that had signed Helena's petition, that had just flinched from her touch. I calmly reached into my bag and zipped it closed, the sound sharp in the silence. "After you finished answering to the court," I said. He recoiled, as if I had, finally, slapped him back. He turned, his shoulders slumped, and walked to his chair, where he sat down, a stranger, next to the woman who had just lost him everything. Judge Sims cleared his throat. "We will move on," he said. Judge Sims called the court to order for the final session. The room was packed. The air of a procedural hearing was gone, replaced by the tense, hungry silence of a finale. Barton Hale and Helena were a wall of ice. My father was a void, staring at nothing. "Before we hear closing arguments," Judge Sims announced, his voice neutral, "this court received a communication late yesterday afternoon from a Mr. Arthur Abernathy, the original legal counsel for the testator, Elias Richardson." Hale's head snapped up. I saw a flicker of panic in his eyes. He knew the name. "Mr. Abernathy," the judge continued, "is retired in Florida, but he has been following this case. He overnighted a packet to this court via courier. It was delivered this morning." The judge held up a large manila envelope, sealed with thick, red wax. This envelope, according to Mr. Abernathy's sworn letter, was entrusted to him by Elias Richardson over a decade ago. It bears a simple, handwritten instruction: to be opened by a sitting judge of the Northland County Chancery Court only in the event of a formal custodial dispute regarding Maple Row Farm. That dispute is now before us. The judge took a small, sharp letter opener and slid it under the wax. The sound was a crisp tear, like a branch snapping in a quiet forest. He broke the seal. He pulled out a single, folded document. It was another codicil, written on the same heavy watermarked paper as the one I had found in the stair. It was also in my grandfather's hand. Judge Sims read it to himself first. His expression did not change. He simply read, his eyes moving back and forth, once, twice. He then put the paper down on his bench. "Mr. Hale, Ms. Richardson," he said, "this is a second, final codicil to the trust. It appears my ruling on the first addendum was premature, or rather, incomplete. He put his glasses on. This document is titled, The Living Test. It states, and I quote, "My trust is not a title, it is a job. My farm is not a picture, it is an engine. The first addendum defines the nature of the labor, but this one defines the proof." My heart was hammering against my ribs, a slow, heavy beat. The judge continued to read from Elias's words. "The North Orchard, with its 130 trees, is the heart of the farm. It is the most difficult, the least profitable, and the most honest. It demands work when no one is looking. Therefore, the irrevocable right of custodianship shall be granted, above all other petitions or claims, to the individual who can prove they have personally harvested, sorted, and pressed the apple crop from this orchard for a minimum of 5 harvest seasons within the last 10 years. Hale shot to his feet. "Your Honor, this is absurd. We are talking about 60 acres of land, a multi-million-dollar asset, and this codicil wants to hinge it on apples? This is senile. It's an eccentric fantasy, not a legal instrument." Judge Sims looked at him, his expression cold. "Mr. Hale, are you a partner at the firm that notarized this document, formally challenging your own founding partner's work and the testator's sanity?" Hale turned a dull, mottled red. He sat back down. "The codicil continues," the judge said. "Proof shall not be in the form of receipts, which can be bought. Proof shall be in the work itself. The custodian must present the stamped barrel staves from the Richardson cider press for those 5 seasons. The staves must bear the official farm firebrand and the harvest date. These staves, and only these staves, will be accepted as evidence." He concludes, "If no party can produce the staves, the land is to be turned over to the state conservancy. I would rather the state have it than a fraud." The room was silent. Helena was actually smiling, a thin, cold, vicious smile. She looked at me. This was a puzzle she was certain I could not solve. She thought I was just a woman with tax receipts. "Well, Ms. Richardson?" the judge asked. His voice was not unkind. He was giving me a chance. "This is a very specific, very rustic burden of proof. Can you meet it?" I unzipped the large canvas duffel bag I had brought with me, the one I had placed by my chair. I reached inside and pulled out a single, curved piece of oak. It was the top stave from an apple barrel. It was dark with age and apple cider stains. In the center, burned deep into the wood, was the R brand of the farm, and beneath it, the date, October, 2 years ago. "This is one," I said, placing it on the table. Helena's smile faltered. I reached in again. I pulled out a second. Identical stave. October, 3 years ago. I pulled out a third. September, 5 years ago. A fourth. October, 6 years ago. And a fifth. October, 8 years ago. I had kept them. I never knew why. After I had finished the pressing each year, alone in the cold barn, I would take the top stave from the primary barrel as a memento, a marker of the work, and store them in the loft. They were my private trophies, my quiet record. 5 staves, I said. 5 seasons. "Objection!" Hale was on his feet, but his voice was thin. She could have faked those. Anyone can burn a date into old wood." "The codicil also requires a witness signature," I said. I turned all 5 staves over. On the back of each, carved with a simple utility knife, were the initials AOV. "Your Honor," I said, "I believe Etta Varner, who is still present in this court, can confirm her mark." Etta was called to the stand. She touched the wood of the first stave. "Mrs. Varner?" the judge asked. "Do you recognize this?" "I do, Your Honor," Etta said, her voice clear. "That's my mark. I carved it myself. I remember that year. That was the year of the early frost. Leah called me, worried about the blossoms. But she came. She always came. I'd come over with my thermos of coffee at dawn, and she'd already be up in the trees. We'd sort them in the barn, her in her work clothes, me just trying to keep up. She'd have that old press Elias built. She'd be working it herself. I'd sign the stave when the last barrel was full. It was our tradition. Thank you, Mrs. Varner, the judge said. He turned to Barton Hale. Mr. Hale, your client's petition, her invoices from Silverline Aesthetics. I find no mention in any of your exhibits of the North Orchard. Was your client even aware of its existence? Hale stammered. The orchard. The apples they are not commercially relevant, Your Honor. They're an antique hobby. In this courtroom, Mr. Hale, Judge Sims said, a thin, dry smile touching his lips. Apples are very relevant. He was about to speak again, but I held up a hand. Your Honor, I said, my grandfather was a thorough man. He knew, just as Mr. Hale has argued, that someone might try to fake the work. He knew a signature could be coerced, that staves could be burned. He left one final piece of proof. I walked to the lectern. He was a tinkerer. He loved gadgets. He also did not trust anyone. He believed in data. I held up a small, black object, a simple SD memory card. My grandfather, Elias, hid this in plain sight. It was taped inside a hollowed-out space under the main handle of the Richardson cider press. I found it 2 days ago, when I was preparing the staves for court. What is on it? The judge asked. The truth, I said. Elias installed a battery-operated, motion-activated time-lapse camera in the rafters of the press barn, aimed directly at the cider press. He wired it to the press handle itself. Every time the handle was cranked, the camera would wake up and film. He set it to record one frame every 30 seconds. The court clerk helped me set up the video feed to the room's monitors. The screens flickered. The first image was blurry. Then it focused. It was the cider press. The corner of the screen showed a timestamp. October, 8 years ago. 4:17 a.m. The barn was dark. Then, a light flickered on. A figure, younger, but unmistakably me, walked into the frame. I was dragging a massive canvas bin of apples. The time-lapse began. The courtroom watched as, for 10 silent minutes, I hauled crate after crate. They watched me climb the press, dump the apples into the grinder. They watched me struggle with the heavy wheel. At one point, the timestamp read 6:03 a.m. The video showed me stopping, wiping my face with a red cloth. There was a black smear of axle grease across my cheek. The footage cut. The next sequence. October. 6 years ago. 5:22 a.m. The press was jammed. The video showed me, my hair tied back, with a wrench and a grease gun, my arm deep inside the gears of the machine, physically repairing it. The next sequence. October. 5 years ago. Etta Varner was there, just as she said, handing me a mug. I was laughing, covered in apple pulp. The next. October. 3 years ago. The last. October. 2 years ago. The timestamps on the screen matched the fire-branded dates on the barrel staves, the logbook, the witnesses, the staves, and the video. It was a closed loop. It was a perfect, unassailable block of evidence. The video clicked off. The silence in the room was heavy, complete. I looked at my father. His face was in his hands. He was weeping, not loud, but the kind of deep, silent, hopeless crying of a man who has realized he is a stranger to his own life. He never knew. He had been at parties, at board meetings, while I was, in the middle of the night, alone, covered in grease and pulp, keeping his father's legacy alive. He never even knew to ask. Helena was on her feet. Her mask of cool serenity was gone. Her face was dark with rage. "This is ridiculous!" she shouted, her voice breaking. "This is a circus, a treasure hunt. You are going to let a dead man and a sentimental garden party decide the fate of a multi-million-dollar asset? An orchard decides the land?" Judge Sims looked at her, his gavel in his hand, but he did not use it. He let her outburst hang in the air. When he spoke, his voice was ice. "Mrs. Marrow Richardson," he said. "It was never about the apples. It was about the work. It was never about the value. It was about the values. He pointed to the screen, which was now black. The testator, Elias Richardson, left one final thing on that memory card. After the last time lapse, there is a single, still frame, a text file he must have uploaded. He nodded to the clerk. The screen flickered, and a single sentence appeared, written in a simple, plain text. It was my grandfather's handwriting, scanned and saved. The custodian is the one who shows up when no one is looking. The final sentence from my grandfather's text file hung in the silent courtroom. The custodian is the one who shows up when no one is looking. It was an epitaph for Helena's petition and a verdict on my father's life. Judge Sims, his face impassive, finally looked down from the screen. Given the evidence of the addenda, the logbooks, the witness testimony, the barrel staves, and the authenticated video, this court's primary path is clear. But he was not finished. He turned to the financial evidence I had presented 2 days prior. However, he said, his voice dropping to a new, colder register, the matter of the petition's motive remains. This court formally accepts into evidence Exhibit H, the financial diagram submitted by Ms. Richardson, which traces a sum of $40,000 from the Richardson Foundry through the Shell Corporation's Silverline Aesthetics and ultimately to the petitioner's private company, Marrow and Mirror. Barton Hale's jaw was so tight I thought I would hear his teeth crack. The blood had drained from his face. This was no longer about a loss. This was about disbarment. Furthermore, the judge continued, this court received a call this morning from the Northland County District Attorney's Office. Upon reviewing the public filings from this case, specifically the evidence of financial routing, the white-collar fraud unit has officially opened an investigatory file into Silverline Aesthetics and Marrow and Mirror. The click of laptops from the press row was the only sound. Helena was staring at my father, her expression unreadable, as if he were a piece of furniture that had just broken. He remained with his head in his hands. And finally, the judge said, in the interest of establishing a pattern of financial misrepresentation, the court will hear from one final witness, called yesterday by the respondent. He nodded to the bailiff. The court calls Mr. Jonas Fry, a man in a navy blue blazer, the uniform of the Northland Events Hall, walked nervously to the stand. He was the venue's finance manager. I had found him after I'd noticed the hall's name on one of Helena's gala programs, cross-referenced with my father's business expenses. I had no lawyer, so I had submitted my questions to the judge, who now posed them. Mr. Fry, the judge said, you have reviewed the invoices submitted by Marrow and Mirror to the Richardson Foundry for the last 3 annual Riverton Legacy Galas? Yes, Your Honor. And you have reviewed the invoices your hall submitted to Marrow and Mirror for those same events? Yes. And what did you find? They don't match, Mr. Fry said, visibly sweating but sticking to his facts. Mrs. Marrow Richardson's invoices to the Foundry, which she filed as business expenses, list line items for structural lighting rigs, temporary load-bearing stage construction, and subflooring reinforcement. Those are major, high-cost capital expenses. And did your hall provide those services? No, Your Honor. Our invoices to her list decorative uplighting, 6-inch rental riser, and portable dance floor. She was billing the Foundry for construction, but she was only buying party decorations. She asked me to use the word structural on my invoice. I told her I couldn't do that. It was just for the photos. It was the final nail, the farm, the galas. It was all the same pattern. She billed for structural work, for substance, while only providing a photo opportunity, a pretty hollow facade. The judge dismissed the witness. He looked at the wreckage of Helena's case. The house of cards had not just fallen. It was a pile of ash. But the collapse was not contained to the courtroom. The avalanche had already started outside. That afternoon, the society blogger, the one Helena had fed stories to for years, posted a new entry. She was furious. She had been sold a narrative of a troubled daughter and a grieving wife. The audio of the slap, which she had only heard in the muffled courtroom, had been given to her by Mara Kincaid, the blogger, feeling like a tool, uploaded the clean, high-fidelity, 20-second file directly. The sound of the slap was brutal. Helena's words, "Make sure she learns gratitude," were clear as a bell. Within an hour, her world evaporated. The first email came from the chair of the Northland County Children's Hospital. In light of the disturbing audio and the court testimony regarding financial impropriety, the board has voted unanimously to request Mrs. Marrow Richardson's immediate resignation. By 5 p.m., 2 more major donors to her charity had pulled their funding, citing a crisis of confidence in her leadership. Her entire social and political scaffolding, the one she had built by weaponizing my father's money, was gone. The financial contagion hit my father's foundry the next morning. The president of Apex Manufacturing, who had a $2 million standing order for custom gears, called my father's office. He was a self-made man who had no patience for fraud. The call, as I later learned, was brief. "Graham, I'm reading the ledger. I can't have my company's supply chain associated with a fraud investigation. We're pausing the contract, effective immediately." A second, smaller contract was canceled an hour later. It was a favor Helena had traded for gala tickets, and the new CEO felt no loyalty. I was at my condo, analyzing the foundry's public debt load. When my alert pinged, it was a new filing with the county recorder, a default notice. My blood went cold. It wasn't on the house. It was on the foundry. I read the document. It was a secondary lien, a high-interest, short-term note for $250,000. The lender was a private equity group known for corporate raids, and the collateral was the foundry's land and equipment. Helena had taken out the loan 6 weeks ago, using my father's power of attorney, the one he had meticulously given her. The purpose listed? Capital for the Riverton Legacy Gala. She had leveraged my grandfather's and my father's entire life's work to pay for champagne and ice sculptures. The first payment was due in 2 days. She had been so sure she would win the farm, sell it, and cover the loan before my father ever found out. I looked at the notice. I made a phone call. I paid the interest and filed for an emergency injunction on the note. Citing the ongoing fraud investigation, I stopped the foreclosure. I had saved his company. He would never even know. The final day of the hearing arrived. It was just for the judgment. The hallway outside the courtroom was quiet, the press having already gotten their story. My father approached me, alone. He looked like a man walking in his sleep. His suit was rumpled. "Leah," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He did not look at me. He looked at my briefcase. "Leah, the trust, your grandfather's papers. Can I see them?" He was, for the first time, asking to read the manual. Before I could answer, Helena was there. She appeared at his elbow, her face a hard painted mask. "Graham, darling, don't bother Leah. We have copies. Our copies. Let's go." She put her hand on his arm, the same controlling, possessive grip, and he moved. He pulled his arm from her grasp, a sharp, angry gesture that left her hand hanging in the air between them. It was the loudest thing I had ever seen him do. He turned his back on her and faced me. "Leah," he whispered, and the shame was a physical, sour smell. "I swear to you, I did not know about the bulldozer. I would never." I looked at him, the man who had said, "We'll talk later," the man who had been busy, the man who had chosen the sound of applause over the truth, every single time. "You didn't know," I said, my voice flat. "Because you didn't want to know. You didn't look. That's all. You just didn't look." His face crumpled. He understood. It was not an excuse. It was his conviction. He turned and walked away, not to his wife, but to the far end of the hall. Alone. Helena watched him go, the last piece of her empire. She turned to me, her eyes no longer containing the practiced tears of the socialite. They were black with a cold, pure hatred. She walked directly up to me, cornering me against the wall, You think you've won, she hissed, her voice a low vibration. You think you're so smart with your little folders and your rustic videos. You've destroyed this family. You built this. Helena, I said. This is your structure. Her face tightened. I have friends. You know, powerful friends. Not just in this little town. You work for Northlight, don't you? A disaster group. It would be a disaster if someone were to find out about your little scandal in Haiti. The one from 3 years ago. The one they covered up. It was a good threat, a desperate one, and a total fabrication. I had never been to Haiti. I looked at her. And for the first time in her presence, I smiled. A small, genuine, pitying smile. Helena, I said. I reached into the inner breast pocket of my blazer, the one I had been waiting to use. I pulled out a single, thick, cream-colored envelope, just like the one she had used to serve me. Her name was on it, printed from my laptop. She took it, her hand hesitating. She opened it. She read the first line. It was a formal cease and desist letter, drafted by a Northlight Response Group corporate attorney. It warned her against any and all contact, public or private. It cited, with legal precision, the statutes for defamation, slander per se, and most importantly, tortious interference with a business relationship. It informed her that any attempt to contact my employer would be met with an immediate and very public lawsuit. Her face went gray. She had threatened a disaster expert with a fire she had no idea how to light. The thing you've never understood, I said, zipping up my bag, is the difference between our jobs. I nodded at her, at the mess she had made, at the life she had ruined, including her own. You organize galas. I organize evacuations. I walked past her and into the courtroom to hear the final judgment. I didn't go back to my condo, after the judgment, which was quiet, formal, and final. I drove straight to Maple Row. I let myself into the cold house, the one Helena had staged, and walked right through it, out the back door, and onto the porch. The air was still, holding its breath before the evening change. I sat on the top step, the one that was worn smooth. I leaned my head against the post and reached my hand underneath the wide railing, my fingers tracing the familiar, deep grooves, strong but not cruel. My grandfather's words, it had been his test, his command, and his protection, all carved into the wood. The house felt wrong, but the porch felt right. The old swing set Elias had built, hung with heavy chains, was peeling. The green paint was flaking, showing the gray weathered wood underneath. It looked tired. I went to the barn. The place was a cathedral of my grandfather's systems. Everything had a hook, a label, a place. In the paint locker, I found 3 cans of Riverton green, the exact shade he had always used. I found sandpaper, scrapers, and 2 good brushes. I started to work. I scraped the old, loose paint. The sound was a dry, rhythmic scratch. I sanded the bare wood smooth. My shoulders, already tight from the tension of the hearing, began to ache, and then to burn, and then to settle into the familiar rhythm of labor. This was not a trial. This was work. This was real. I opened the can of paint. The smell was sharp, like metal and memory. I dipped the brush and made the first, long, even stroke. The color was rich, covering the gray wood. I worked for an hour, then 2. The sun began to dip, turning the fields from gold to a deep, bruised purple. The sweat on my forehead was not from fear or anger. It was from effort, and for the first time in days, my mind was quiet. The work was simple. The results were immediate. I was fixing something, not just defending it. The strokes of the brush felt like a kind of prayer. I was finishing the second arm of the swing when I heard a vehicle, not on the main drive, but on the old farm track that cut through the lower field. A truck I recognized. My father's old work truck, the one he hadn't driven in years, the one Helena hated. It pulled to a stop near the barn. He got out. He was not wearing a suit. He wore old jeans and a jacket, and he was wearing his old work cap, the one with the foundry's original logo. The one he wore when he was still a man who worked with his hands. He was alone. He stood by the truck for a long time, just watching me work in the fading light. I did not stop. I dipped the brush, made another long, even stroke. I would not call out to him. This was my land. He was the visitor. Finally, he walked over, his boots slow on the grass. He stopped at the edge of the porch, 10 feet away. "Leah," he said. His voice was raw. I finished the stroke. "Hello, Dad. Can I have 5 minutes? And maybe a seat?" I gestured with my chin to the top step, the one I had sat on earlier. "The step is free." He sat, not on the step, but on the porch floor itself, his back against a post, as if he did not deserve the comfort. He watched me paint. "It looks good," he said. "It'll need a second coat." The silence stretched, filled only by the whisper of my brush and the first chirps of the evening crickets. I read it," he said, his voice thick. I kept painting. "Read what?" "The codicil. The apple one. I asked Jessup for a copy. I read your grandfather's words." He pulled the old brass compass from his pocket. My grandfather's compass. It looked dull in his hand. "I went to your table," he said. "After the judge, when you were gone, I took this. I hope that was all right. It's yours, Dad? He left it for you." "No," he said, his voice breaking on the single word. "No, he didn't. He left it on his desk. I just took it. I put it in my briefcase. I thought it made me look like him, like a man who knew his direction." He looked at the compass, turning it over. All it did was show me how lost I was. He held it out to me. "It points truer in your hands, Leah. It always did." I stopped painting. I looked at the compass in his outstretched, trembling hand. I looked at his face, gray with shame. I wiped my hands on my rag. I took the compass. Its weight was familiar. Solid. I did not put it in my pocket. I placed it on the railing, right next to the carving. "Thank you," I said. I dipped my brush back in the paint. He seemed to sag. He had expected. I do not know what he had expected. Absolution? A hug? A fight? He did not get one. "I thought," he said, his voice a near whisper, "that the point was the applause. I thought the legacy was the name on the building, the scholarship, the gala. I thought a thank you had to be loud, or it didn't count. I thought your grandfather would be proud of all that." He let out a long, shuddering breath. He wasn't building a name, Leah. He was building a farm, and I was busy building a stage. For her. He said her name like it was ash in his mouth. I am so sorry." "I know," I said. "That day," he said, "at the party, in the hall, when I said we'd talk later." He looked up at me, and his eyes were clear, and they were terrible. "I was wrong to say we'd talk later," he said. "That was the lie. I was wrong." He had said it, the thing I had waited 15 years to hear, the thing I had given up on hearing, and now that it was here, it was just words, sad, tired words in the dusk. It did not fix anything. I looked at the swing. I looked at the half-empty can of paint. I put my brush down. I walked to the barn. I came back with the second brush, the one I had cleaned and set aside. I held it out to him. He looked at it, confused. "The steps need doing next," I said. "And the railings, if you want to stay. You log the hours." He looked at the brush, then at my face. He saw no forgiveness there. He saw no anger. He just saw the work. He took the brush. His hand was steady. "Show me where to start," he said. I handed him the second can. "We'll do the railings first. Long, even strokes. Don't drip." For an hour, we painted in silence. It was dark now, the only light coming from the single, yellow bulb of the porch lamp. The only sound was the two brushes, whispering against the wood. It was not forgiveness. It was not a reunion. It was just two people, working in the dark, painting a porch. It was the most honest conversation we had had in my entire adult life. The air changed. The crickets went silent. A low, cool wind swept across the field, smelling of rain and turned earth. "Storm's coming in," he said. "I see it." I looked up. The clouds were heavy, moving fast. "I need to cover the North Barns hay delivery." I put my brush down and walked to the tractor shed. I pulled out a massive, heavy-duty canvas tarp. It was stiff, hard to manage alone. I started to drag it. He was right behind me. "I'll take a side," he said. We carried it together, the weight easier to manage. We unrolled it over the new, sweet-smelling bales. The wind was picking up now, whipping the edges. "Hold that corner," I yelled. I went to the post and started feeding a rope through the grommet. My hands moved quickly, automatically. I threw a taut line hitch, followed by 2 half hitches to secure the tail. It was a knot for high wind conditions, one that would not slip, one that would not bind. It was a knot I had used to secure rescue lines. My father was standing there, holding his corner, just watching my hands. "It's done," I said, giving the line a final, sharp tug. "Let's get the other side." He did not move. He was staring at the knot. "When?" he said, his voice full of a strange, quiet awe. "Did you learn to do that?" The first drops of rain, cold and heavy, began to fall. I looked at him. The man who had been too busy, the man who had not read the mail, the man who had not asked. "I learned it," I said, "in the years you were too busy to ask." His face crumpled, but he did not look away. He just nodded, accepting the fact, the same way he would accept a diagnosis. We finished the other 3 corners, the rain starting to soak our jackets. We ran back to the porch, pulling the paint cans inside just as the sky opened up. We stood there, dripping on the porch, watching the rain hammer the fields. The new paint was gleaming, dark green in the wet. We had finished just in time. He looked at his hands, covered in paint and rain. He looked at me, my hair plastered to my face, my own hands just as green, and he laughed. It was not a laugh of joy. It was an awkward, rusty, broken sound. I looked at him, and I laughed, too, just once, a single, short, surprised bark. It was clumsy. It was real. It was a start. "Well," he said, wiping the rain from his face. "Second coat tomorrow?" 6 a.m., I said. "Bring coffee." He nodded. 6 a.m.? He walked to his truck, not looking back. I watched him drive away, his taillights disappearing into the storm. I turned off the porch light, went inside, and, for the first time, I locked the door. The courtroom was not just full, it was compressed. The air was thick with the weight of expectation, a heavy, silent mass that muffled every cough and scrape of a chair. The press was packed 3 deep against the back wall, a solid line of cameras and notebooks. Judge Harold L. Sims entered. He did not look at the gallery. He sat, opened a single file, and looked at the 3 of us at the tables. "This court is in session," he said, his voice cutting through the silence. "I have reviewed all exhibits, testimony, and the binding codicils of the Elias Richardson Trust. I am prepared to deliver judgment." He looked at Barton Hale. "Mr. Hale, your petition, filed on behalf of Mr. Graham Richardson, to remove the named custodian, Ms. Leah Richardson, on grounds of prolonged neglect and sustained interruption of duties, is hereby, and with prejudice, dismissed." A wave of sound, a single, sharp intake of breath, moved through the room. "Furthermore," the judge continued, "this court affirmatively confirms the full, irrevocable, and non-transferable right of custodianship of the Maple Row Farm, Parcel 61A, to the respondent, Ms. Leah Richardson." He looked directly at me. "This confirmation is based on the overwhelming and unassailable evidence presented. Specifically, the handwritten labor addendum, the living test codicil, the corroborated farm logs, the physical barrel staves, and the authenticated time-stamped video recordings of the custodian performing the required labor. Ms. Richardson has, in the opinion of this court, exceeded the requirements of the trust. He was not finished. He put that paper down and picked up another. This court cannot, however, ignore the secondary matters uncovered, the financial diagrams, bank records, and testimony related to the entities. Silverline Aesthetics and Marrow and Mirror show credible, significant irregularities. This court is formally referring the complete file on both entities to the Northland County District Attorney's Financial Crimes Unit for immediate investigation. Barton Hale closed his eyes. He began, very slowly, to place his pens into his briefcase. Finally, Judge Sims said, his eyes finding Helena. The audio recording of the petitioner's assault on the respondent. While the petition was decided on the letter of the trust, the court notes that this recording, capturing the petitioner's calculated physical aggression and her stated motive regarding gratitude, served to fatally undermine all claims of familial duty and good faith. It destroyed the petitioner's credibility before this court. Silence. The judgment was total. Helena was a statue of white, cold rage, her hands clenched on the table. Then, my father stood. He was unsteady. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at his wife. "Your Honor," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. "Your Honor, may I address the court?" "No." He turned. He faced me. He stood in the open space between the tables, alone. He looked at my face, at my eyes, at the blazer I was wearing. He looked at me as if he were a man dying of thirst and I was water. "Leah," he said, and his voice was so quiet, but it filled the entire room. I just wanted to say," his face crumpled, "I see you." It was not an apology. It was not an excuse. It was a simple statement of fact, a confession of a blindness that had lasted 15 years. It was the opposite of, "We'll talk later." It was, for Helena, the final, unforgivable betrayal. "No!" she shrieked, the sound tearing through the courtroom, a raw, ugly sound of complete collapse. She lunged to her feet, her chair crashing backward. "This is a conspiracy! This is a joke! You," she pointed a shaking finger at the judge, "you let this ungrateful child manipulate you with her farmer's almanac and her fake videos. This is a setup. She has poisoned him. She has poisoned everyone." Barton Hale was on his feet, his face ashen. Your Honor, please, in light of my client's uncontrollable outburst and a fundamental, irreconcilable breakdown in the attorney-client relationship, I must formally petition to withdraw as counsel, effective immediately." Judge Sims hit the gavel. A single, sharp crack. "Mr. Hale, your petition is granted. Mrs. Marrow Richardson, you will be silent, or you will be held in contempt and removed. This court is adjourned." The room exploded. The press surged forward, but I did not move. I watched Hale flee the room, not even glancing at his former client. I watched Helena, surrounded, her face a mask of spitting, incoherent rage. A local reporter pushed through, the same one from the hallway. Leah, you won! It's over!" "But what now? Helena's allies are saying you'll just sell the farm to developers yourself, that this was all just a power play." I ignored the question. I turned and walked to the clerk's desk, where my evidence was being logged. I picked up a single, fresh document from my bag. The reporter followed me. "Leah, what are you going to do with a multi-million-dollar farm? Why fight so hard just to let it sit?" I turned, and I held up the document. It was file-stamped. The time of the stamp was 8:05 a.m. "This morning." "This," I said, my voice cutting through the noise, "is a copy of a permanent conservation easement, which I filed with the Northland County Register this morning. It just became legally active upon Judge Sims's confirmation of my custodianship. The reporter stared, confused. What does that mean? It means, I said, that Maple Row Farm can never be developed. It can never be subdivided. It can never be mortgaged for a gala or for anything else. It can never be sold. Not by me, not by my heirs, not by anyone. As of 9:45 A, its 60 acres are protected, in perpetuity. It will remain exactly what my grandfather intended, an engine. The reporter's jaw was open. But you won. You had the right. Why would you tie your own victory? You've just locked up all the value. I looked at him, and I finally understood what my grandfather had been protecting. Because this was never about winning or losing, I said. It was never about the value. This was about not letting love be monetized. It was about not letting stewardship be turned into a balance sheet. I held up the paper. The easement also does one more thing. It establishes the Elias Richardson Bursary Fund, the farm's limited, sustainable profits, from the apples, from the hay, will now fund an annual scholarship, not for a party, but for local trainees at the Northland County Emergency Services Department, for EMTs, for volunteer firefighters, for rescue divers. The first grant cycle opens next month. Etta Varner is the community co-administrator to ensure it serves the people who actually do the work. I turned to leave. I saw my father, standing by the far wall, near the public programs office. He had heard it all. He was just watching me. He didn't approach. He just nodded. Once, a small, private gesture. Then he turned, walked to the community programs window, and I heard him say, in his broken voice, "Foundry safety. I've taught workshops for 40 years. Maybe for the bursary, maybe I can help." It was not redemption. It was not a grand gesture. It was a start. It was an application. It was the first hour. I walked toward the main exit. The crowd was dissolving. Helena was standing by the elevators, her rage now replaced by a cold, terrible stillness. She was alone. A man in a cheap suit, holding a packet of papers, walked up to her. "Helena Marrow Richardson?" She nodded, annoyed, expecting an ally. He handed her the packet. "You've been served." I did not look back. It was the summons from the district attorney. As I pushed the door, the only sound I heard was the sharp, frantic, staccato click-clack-click of her heels on the marble floor, a sound of pure panic as she walked away, too fast, in the wrong direction. I pushed open the heavy courthouse doors. The air that hit my face was not the stale, pressurized air of the courtroom. It was the air of late autumn, crisp, clear, and cold. The sky was a high, perfect blue. The sound of the traffic on the street was just noise. I thought, for a second, about that night at the party. The oppressive heat, the smell of wilting flowers and lies, the massive crystal chandelier, swinging slow and heavy, a pendulum counting down. Now, it was just a memory, a piece of glass in a dark room, far away. I reached into my blazer pocket. My fingers found the solid, heavy, brass compass. I closed my hand around it. True north. I pulled out my phone. I sent one text message, to Mara Kincaid. Just 2 words. "Thank you." Her reply came back almost instantly. "Anytime. Go get 'em." I got in my truck. I did not drive to my condo. I drove past the town limits, toward the county line, toward home. I drove back to the farm, where the final word was not applause, and it was not revenge, it was stewardship. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to hear your thoughts. So please comment below and let me know where you're listening from. Let's connect and share our experiences. Don't forget to subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Like this video, and give it an extra boost by hitting the hype button so more people can hear this story.